Good morning and welcome. I'm Marion Dry, Chair of Class Act HR 73. It's my honor to welcome you to this symposium, Climate Change, Public-Private Partnerships, and Social Equity, Lessons from Bangladesh, which is jointly sponsored by our host, the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs, and the Salata Institute and Class Act HR 73. We of Class Act are grateful to WCFIA for being our gracious hosts and to the Salata Institute for partnering with us on this. We are grateful to all of our program participants, Harvard faculty, fellows, students, and alumni. They are an extraordinarily diverse and expert group who are both academic experts and practitioners in the world. This is the third symposium Class Act has hosted with WCFIA and our first with Salata, so thank you. Before we begin the program, I want to spend a few minutes introducing you to Class Act HR 73 and our Benazir Bhutto Leadership Program. Class Act, which is Class Achieving Change Together, is a nonprofit organization developed by members of the Harvard-Radcliffe class of 1973 in 2013, provide our classmates and others with opportunities to work together to create positive change in the areas of justice and civic engagement, education, health, and the environment. In our 10 years of activism, classmates have worked together to protect democracy here and abroad, to preserve biodiversity and habitat, to strengthen health equity, and to share our skills and expertise with small nonprofit organizations around the world. Understanding that education is a vital path to understanding, we created the Class Act Zoom Forum series, which is open to all, drawing on national and international experts from our class and the global Harvard community. These forums explore topics within our areas of focus with the object of helping attendees gain deeper understanding about how they can take effective action to create change locally, nationally, and globally. We of Class Act consider ourselves to be alumni ambassadors for Harvard in the world, and we express our appreciation for our Harvard education through coming together in community to take action. Early in our evolution, we created the Benazir Bhutto Leadership Program in honor of our classmate, Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. The program's core element is a fellowship that supports scholars enrolled in the Edward S. Mason program of the Kennedy School of Government. The goals of the Benazir Bhutto Leadership Program are to engage and support effective, creative individuals from predominantly Muslim countries in the geographic space from Lebanon to Bangladesh, who are committed to principle-based positive change, to assist leaders from all sectors of these societies in acquiring tools they can use to succeed in working with their countrymen and women to effect change, and to improve the American public's cross-cultural understanding of leadership challenges within these countries. To date, we have supported 6 Benazir Bhutto Fellows who share Benazir's commitment to democracy, equality for women, reconciliation of religious and cultural differences, and education without gender or religious bias. Nazmul Haq, on whose work this symposium is founded, is our current BBLP fellow and our first male. The other 5 extraordinary fellows are back in their countries or working internationally. 3 of them came to us from Pakistan, 1 from Lebanon, and another from Bangladesh. Information about them is on our website. It is now my great pleasure to invite my classmate and friend, Ambassador Peter Galbraith, to come to the podium to talk a bit about Benazir and her legacy.
Thank you, Marion. And before I begin, I would just like to say a word of appreciation to Marion Dry for what's been accomplished with Class Act. The idea was brilliant, that we had entered Harvard at a time when we were going to change the world. Possibly we didn't all do that, but now we had the experience, the wealth, and the time to still make a difference. And she and her founding fellow classmates had the idea to organize and draw on the class of 1973's talents in the ways that she has just described. It's a very good thing to have an idea that good, but it's even rarer to make it a reality, and that's what Marion and her colleagues as the founders of Class Act have done. Now, Marion has given me a very difficult task here, which is to say a few words about Benazir Bhutto. The difficult part for me is few words, because this is somebody who is my friend all her adult life. We met on our first day at Harvard and were last in contact a couple of days before she was killed, when she asked me to see if I could be in touch with the president of Kurdistan, Kurdish president of Kurdistan, Jalal Talabani, who was a friend, to acquire jammers so that improvised explosive devices could not be set off by mobile phones during her campaign rallies. And why? Because the government of Pakistan would not provide the military dictatorship protection for her. And of course, a couple of days later, she was killed by a suicide bomber, so not a mobile phone. In preparing for this talk, I realized just how much climate events in East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, shaped her future and worldview. On November 12, 1970, a typhoon killed between 300,000 and 500,000 people in Bangladesh. In fact, the deadliest tropical storm in typhoon in history. And it was the slow response of the West Pakistan-dominated military junta that contributed to the overwhelming victory in elections held in December of that year of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and his Awami League. In fact, they won 167 of the 169 seats allocated to East Pakistan, and therefore a majority of the Pakistan National Assembly, and that was a result that the Pakistan military refused to accept. And that set off a string of events that led to Bangladesh's declaration of independence in March of 1971, the brutal repression in the spring and summer of 71, spring, summer, and fall of 71, the Indian intervention in December, and the independence. The end result of that was that Benazir's father, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who had been in prison at the beginning of that period, ended the year as the president of Pakistan. And I have to say that during that time, Benazir, whom we all knew as Pinky, we had many arguments about this. She was the only member of our class who was prepared to defend what Pakistan was doing. And it's something to her credit that she later regretted, not only privately to me, but in her memoir, Daughter of Destiny. Like all of us, and I might add that she was with us in Vermont, actually that Christmas, as all these events unfolded and his father became prime minister. Like all of us, she was shaped by her experiences. The same military that murdered hundreds of thousands of people in East Pakistan overthrew her father's democratic government and then hanged him. Benazir could have chosen safety of a life abroad, but instead she stayed in Pakistan, where she was imprisoned by the same military dictator, General Zia-ul-Haq, who had murdered her father. And while our classmates were starting our careers and families, she was in a Class C cell in Succor, in the stifling heat of the Sindh desert. And even at the worst of times, she kept her faith in the values that she had learned here at Harvard and at Oxford. In fact, she wrote me in 1981 in a letter that she'd smuggled out of prison that was written on very thin paper. And why didn't they tell us at Harvard and Oxford the price that we would pay for democracy? It seemed so easy then. And when she was finally released in January of 1984, not because of any intervention by the Reagan administration, which supported Zia, but by the efforts of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, she and I met up in London, and I have to say, as her friend, I said, don't go back. You know, this is your chance. You're 31 years old. You can lead a normal life. But she didn't. She did go back. And against all odds, in her struggle for the restoration of democracy, a struggle that went from 77 to 1988, she prevailed on November 16th, 1988, in the Pakistan elections. As it happened, I was with her in her home in Sindh, rural Sindh, as the returns came in. And I think the next day was perhaps one of the most extraordinary of my life. We left to go to Karachi. There were, all the way in the 25 miles to the airport in Mojadaro, there were people 10 deep cheering. She got on the plane. The pilot came back. It was a small, regular commercial flight to Karachi. Gave her 3 roses, and when we landed in Karachi, there were 500,000 people at the airport. And you know, this also underscores the difference between the promise and what you can often actually accomplish. That night, she and I wrote up a message that I carried to Rajiv Gandhi because it was her hope for better relations with India. But of course, although she became prime minister, in spite of every effort by the military to prevent it a month later, her hands were tied. And then she had another disconnected term as prime minister terminated by the Pakistan military, and she was campaigning for democracy in December of 2007 when she was murdered. A murder in which the Pakistan military was clearly complicit. They knew what was going to happen, and they let it happen. She was an extraordinary person, not only for a belief in democracy, which wasn't just a stated belief. When she became prime minister in December of 1988, the first thing she did was to free all political prisoners, to end censorship in the country, to end the repression of minorities, to stop the cruel punishments of public executions and floggings. But to me, her greatest quality was something that I think is terribly rare in public life. And certainly, if we look at the behavior of one of our political parties in this country, totally absent, and that is courage. She was a person with great political courage and physical courage. The first class act, or one of the first things, was to come up with a project that would honor the memory of Benazir Bhutto, someone who really did change the world and was murdered for it. And there was some discussion at the beginning of perhaps we should endow a chair, perhaps in Islamic studies or something related. Well, I can tell you, that is a very well-studied subject. And instead, what we did was to come up with the idea of, as Marion has described, of endowing a position, a fellowship, for mid-career people from this arc of countries, from Lebanon to Bangladesh, of Islamic countries, so kind of jumping over India, a majority Islamic countries, in public policy. Why public policy? Because politics was, of course, what Benazir devoted her career to. And I will say, as somebody who's been in public life most of my career, it's where the biggest difference, the biggest change can take place. And what was true about these countries? Well, these are the countries that are most in the news because they're the countries where many of the world's problems take place. They happen also to be the countries where women are excluded from public life. And our focus, frankly, was on encouraging women like Benazir to come and to be agents of change in their country. Now, you might think, therefore, the fact that we have a male fellow from Bangladesh is somehow a violation of this principle. But in fact, our principle is really one of gender equality. And for the 30 years and 6 months of the last 32 years, the prime ministers of Bangladesh have been women. So in having Nazma here, we're trying to give men of Bangladesh a chance at public life. Thank you.
I don't normally follow remarks as remarkable as what we just heard. So my thanks to that and to the amazing career of Benazir Bhutto. I'm going to kick us off on the topic of climate change. I'm going to move pretty quickly just because of the agenda, and I've got a fair bit to cover. And so let me turn on some audio for recording. What I want to talk about is climate change, but I want to level set and kind of help the day evolve. And I want to start with a couple of things. First of all, when we think about climate change, we have to think about the root causes, and the root cause of this is largely how we use energy. Okay? This is a flow map of different sources of energy mapped onto how they are used in the United States. And one of the things that you'll see, this is from 2022, while yes, it is the case that we have things like solar and wind and whatnot, they're tiny in comparison. Another observation is that we waste most of that energy. Okay? In India, this is from a little bit ago, 2017, you'll see the contrast between renewable sources of energy and fossil sources of energy even greater. Right? And so when you hear terms like the percentage increase of renewable energy in India is some big number, always remember the denominator. Right? We are very early on in this transition. We are very early on in a transition that is going to last a long time. Right? And it will be hard. And that is the theme. But there are going to be some upsides. So who's implicated by changes to the production and consumption of energy? Again, I'm anchoring on energy as being the sort of forcing function of climate change here. It's individual consumers and voters. It's communities that might be producing fossil fuels, or communities that might be producing renewable energy sources. It's companies, it's ecosystems, and it's even planetary systems, right? And so this is one of these things as a social scientist, as a political scientist, that gets exciting, right? That this is really a cross-section of who we are as a society and the place in which we inhabit. This is a map of the concentration of fossil fuel jobs in the United States, okay? And some familiar themes should jump out: West Virginia, Appalachia, Texas, Wyoming, Montana, et cetera. When you have the geographic concentration of the production of particular things, it makes the politics really tricky. One might say interesting. But this also means that when we're phasing out fossil fuels in this country, this is just an example, similar examples exist in other countries, that geographic clustering can be a real challenge. And that challenge eventuates in a variety of ways. This is the share of state and local revenue that comes from taxes on things like oil and gas. Okay? The state of Wyoming, about 46% of its state budget comes from rents. Now, they've decided to have things like low taxes on other stuff. That's a choice that they've had to make. But the point here is if we're going to phase this stuff out, which we must do, it's not just that we have stranded assets, we could have stranded communities. Right? And the politics of that then becomes crucial to understand and to not be ignored. Again, this is just the United States. You have similar dynamics in other countries. Why is the price of a railway ticket so low in India? Turns out that the coal industry directly subsidizes passenger rail in India. Now, that is leading to conflict as there's heating up of the need for more coal, for more energy production in parts of India, right? That bargain is starting to be challenged, but nonetheless, it shows you the sort of delicate, perhaps insidious ways in which this is interwoven into our economies. And it is not as simple as just buying a Tesla or whatever the sort of simplistic ways that too many people in this country think about this. This is a map of fossil fuel subsidies from 2021, so the extent to which governments literally just make the price of things like gas cheaper. And you know what? there's no better political strategy than making gas cheaper. Furthermore, it's really hard to unwind. So if we're making the thing that is really bad for the world cheaper, that's not a good thing. But it is great politics. We even do it in this country, right? In other countries, it's much more salient. So some of the work that I've done is like, well, how do we confront these challenges? And what are the challenges that governments face in doing so? One of them is that governments inherently face a credibility challenge. They might commit to a community, commit to a new way of action to say, we need to make this transition. But these transitions are very long-term in nature. Political administrations could turn over. The priorities of political administrations can change themselves. Furthermore, this is an area where some of these new opportunities, while they might be saving the planet, they're not all that great economically. The joke is, what is maintenance on a solar field? What is maintenance on a solar field? Maintenance on a solar field is a weed whacker and some Windex. That's a little bit of a sort of simplification, right? Why do unions love coal-fired power plants? Because they're dirty, and that means maintenance, and that means jobs. Okay? These are just stark realities that maybe are hard to accept, but are nonetheless present. The notion of a mid-transition here is going to be extremely important. The mid-transition is, before we get from where we are to some sort of green future, what happens when we're starting to say we need to decommission oil-producing assets while at the same time saying that the owners of those assets, you're not going to be able to tap into that source of revenue off into the future? Well, what does that lead into? Mismanagement, lack of energy, oil spills. Are you really going to take good care of that oil well if you're also being told 10 years from now it's not going to be a viable producer of money for you? Possibly not. This is the notion of a mid-transition. Now, all of this will be happening in the context of warming continuing to happen. We've already baked that in. We could all close our mouths, not drive anymore, emit no CO2, and the planet would continue to warm by the nature of the gases that are already in the atmosphere. That will create damages, and that will cost money. So in this era of when we're trying to use money to transition, we're also going to have to be paying money to deal with all of the damages and adaptation. And this applies even more strongly in places like Bangladesh. Furthermore, we're going to be undergoing massive demographic changes on the planet. Demographics aren't destiny, but populations will remain stable in Asia, and Africa is projected to grow substantially. Now, our governments are starting to pass different types of policies. Here in the United States, we have the Inflation Reduction Act. The European Union has passed something called the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. This is basically the idea that when you import stuff into the European Union, if your country does not have a carbon price like what the European Union has, you're going to have to pay a sort of carbon tariff, right? Great idea. Lots of nice mechanisms to that, right? Essentially, we're not sort of exporting the generation of carbon pollution. But hold on a second. How are countries, say developing countries, going to deal with this, right? What will this do to their exports, their economies? And who's going to exactly help them make that transition to having their own carbon price? The European Union decided not to use funds that are raised from this to help developing countries, for example. It was on the table. It was taken off. I'm doing some work on that topic here. But there's optimism. One of the themes today is about public-private partnerships. Right? I think there's tremendous opportunity here, and you'll hear more about those. How do we crowd in more capital and deploy public capital more efficiently? And how do we leverage complementary expertise? Expertise that might exist in the private sector with expertise that might exist in the public sector. I recently had a chance to teach a course at the business school. I'm a government professor teaching a course at the business school, market mechanisms, government policy. It was beautiful. And there are great examples of this. I taught a case on the Rewa Ultra Mega. I mean, when I found a company, I'm going to say it's the Ultra Mega something. This is the Ultra Mega Solar Park, right? A great partnership between India and the World Bank. But there are storm clouds and opportunities. On the one hand, we have the Biden administration heralding the investments across our country in clean energy technologies, and Donald Trump saying he's going to gut all of that. But there's hope. There's hope in a broad variety of ways. This is basically a plot of just the sort of net benefits to GDP of avoiding the catastrophic harms of climate change. Right? And so if you're out there in the private sector thinking about how you're going to be making 20 years from now, you're not going to be making that great of a return on your investment if the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And it will, unless we do something about this. And so this is basically plotting the sort of mitigation costs that we're going to have to pay. And they are large. I just told you about some of the challenges that there are going to be relative to the benefits that we get, including public health, including a more robust and stable infrastructure. So we've got a lot to do, and today is an opportunity to do it. Thank you.